Iran is one of the most talked about countries in the world today. But what many people do not realize is that this region is actually mentioned in the Bible, just under a different name. So what does the Bible really say about Iran? Long before the name Persia appears in the Bible, the region we now call Iran was known by another name, Elam. The earliest chapters of Genesis introduce Elam as part of the world's family tree. Genesis 10 lists Elam among the sons of Shem, who was one of Noah's 3 sons. This passage, often called the Table of Nations, maps out the ancient peoples and where they settled after the flood. Elam's descendants established themselves in the area that is now southwestern Iran, close to the Persian Gulf. The city of Susa, an ancient capital, stood at the heart of this territory. Susa would later become famous in stories from Daniel and Esther, but its roots go all the way back to these early biblical records. But here is where it gets interesting. Genesis 14 gives us the first real glimpse of Elam as a political power. The text tells of Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, who leads a coalition of eastern kings on a campaign into Canaan. They sweep through the land, defeating several city-states and even capturing Lot, Abraham's nephew. Abraham, known as Abram at this point, organizes a daring rescue. He defeats Chedorlaomer's forces and brings Lot home safely. This story is more than just an early adventure. It shows Elam as a dominant force from the east, reaching deep into the affairs of the ancient Near East. And this detail is important. Elam is not just a footnote. For centuries, the Elamites were known for their warriors, their chariots, and their advanced cities. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of their civilization stretching back to at least 2700 BC, with Susa as a thriving urban center. The Bible's early chapters place Elam right in the middle of the ancient world's power struggles, long before the rise of Persia. Understanding Elam's place in these stories helps make sense of why later biblical writers mention Persia and Media together, and why the land we now call Iran has such a deep and complex biblical history. Long after the days of Elam's early kings, a new power emerged from the east, one that would change the fate of Israel in ways few could have imagined. The Bible begins to speak not just of Elam but of Persia. And with Persia comes a story of unexpected restoration. In the book of Daniel, the Medes and Persians rise to replace Babylon as the world's ruling empire. Daniel's visions and narratives refer to the law of the Medes and Persians, a phrase that signals the arrival of a new order, steady, organized, and far-reaching. Persia becomes the backdrop for some of the most dramatic moments in Israel's exile and return. But here is where it gets interesting. The story turns from loss to hope when Cyrus the Great enters the scene. Ezra chapter 1. And the closing lines of 2 Chronicles both record a decree from Cyrus, king of Persia. In his very first year as ruler over Babylon, Cyrus announces that the God of heaven has charged him to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. He invites the Jewish exiles to return home and even gives back the sacred vessels taken by Nebuchadnezzar decades earlier. The details are precise. More than 5,000 gold and silver items are counted and handed over for the journey. This is often misunderstood as a sudden change of heart. But the biblical text is clear. Cyrus acts because God stirs his spirit, not because of personal sympathy or political strategy. And this detail is important. The Bible's account of Cyrus's decree lines up with what historians have found outside the scriptures. The Cyrus cylinder, unearthed in Babylon and now housed in the British Museum, records how Cyrus restored shrines and repatriated exiled peoples across his empire. While the cylinder does not mention Jerusalem by name, it shows that Cyrus followed a broad policy of letting displaced groups return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. The biblical story fits right into this wider context, giving the decree to the Jews a place among many acts of restoration across the empire. Persia's support did not end with Cyrus. Later, Persian kings such as Darius, Xerxes, and Artaxerxes continued to allow and even fund the rebuilding efforts in Jerusalem. Persian officials, such as Tatenai the governor, are named in both the Bible and Persian records. Their administrative permission and oversight made it possible for the exiles to rebuild the temple and later the city walls. The Persian Empire, for all its size and complexity, stands out in the biblical record as the unlikely instrument of Israel's return and renewal. This period, marked by foreign kings and imperial decrees, reshaped the Jewish community and set the stage for everything that followed. Prophecy brings a different kind of attention to Persia and Elam. Unlike the stories of kings and decrees, these passages speak in the language of vision and warning. Ezekiel and Jeremiah, two of the Bible's most recognized prophets, both mention the lands that became modern Iran, but they do so in ways that are often misunderstood or overstated. Ezekiel 38 is one of the most talked about prophecy passages. Here, Ezekiel describes a future coalition of nations gathered against Israel. Persia is named directly alongside Cush and Put as part of this alliance. The text says that Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets. That is it. No extra details about Persia's actions, no timeline, and no link to specific modern events. Persia is simply listed among the nations in this vision. The rest of the chapter focuses on a mysterious leader called Gog and a dramatic intervention by God. But here it gets interesting. Ezekiel's list is not a prediction about any one country's future behavior. It is a poetic, symbolic lineup, using the names of powerful nations known to Ezekiel's audience. The prophecy's main message is about God's control over history, not about forecasting headlines. Jeremiah 49 contains another key passage. This time the focus is on Elam, the ancient name for part of Iran. Jeremiah delivers an oracle, a message of judgment and hope. He declares, "I will break the bow of Elam, the mainstay of their might. I will bring against Elam the four winds from the four quarters of heaven. I will scatter them to the four winds, and there will not be a nation where Elam's exiles do not go." The oracle continues with words of disaster and scattering, but it ends with a promise. "Yet I will restore the fortunes of Elam in days to come." There is no mention of Israel as the target, no end times scenario, and no direct link to modern Iran. The prophecy speaks to Elam's fate in the ancient world with a future hope attached. This detail is important. Prophetic oracles are not the same as historical narratives. They use vivid imagery, broad declarations, and sometimes symbolic language. Reading these passages carefully means noticing what is actually said and what is not. Ezekiel and Jeremiah both mention Persia and Elam, but only as part of larger messages about God's sovereignty. They do not offer secret codes or predictions about today's headlines. Before making any broader claims, it is wise to read these texts with caution and context. But here's where it gets interesting. The Bible's references to Elam and Persia do not give clear predictions about modern leaders or current events. Ancient names in these texts belong to the world of the biblical writers, not to the borders or governments we know today. This is often misunderstood. Some people try to match headlines with single verses, but that is not a responsible way to read Scripture. The Bible's prophecies speak in broad, sometimes symbolic language, shaped by the issues and empires of their own time. Curiosity and careful study matter more than fear or speculation. Reading these passages in context helps us see what they actually say, and just as important, what they do not. Persia and Elam remind us that the Bible's story is rooted in real places and real history. These names are not just symbols, they represent nations and empires that shaped the lives of ancient peoples. The Bible shows foreign rulers like Cyrus intersecting with God's plan for Israel, weaving together the destinies of different peoples. Prophecy in these texts gives meaning to history for the people who first heard it. Instead of pointing us to predict modern events, these passages invite us to see God's sovereignty and to read with humility. They ask for careful attention, not quick conclusions.
Today, the names change, but the questions remain. The Bible's references to Persia and Elam invite careful reading, not quick predictions. This is often misunderstood, and that detail is important. Context shapes meaning even now. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe.